Bé, bona tarda a tothom i gràcies per venir al Cosmos aquest vespre. L'Assemblea Nacional Catalana als Estats Units desitja que disfruteu d'aquesta vetllada. Take two. Good evening, everyone, and thank you all for coming on out and joining us in what promises to be a very interesting talk. Tonight, the National Catalan Assembly in the United States is proud to welcome Eduard Peris, who is going to tell us about the latest developments in the process to create a constitution for independent Catalonia. Our speaker tonight is a member of Constituïm, the group who has designed the Catalan Constitution proposal, and a member of King's College London, where he is undertaking research on interstate relations in war zones, with a specific focus on Afghanistan. He also holds an international affairs master's from Colombia, and is currently working for a DC-based think tank on projects in the Sahel and Maghreb areas. Last but not least, he's also a season ticket holder for Barca Football Club, which, if you ask me, confirms his expert judgment and good taste, making his talk tonight very promising and surely interesting to you all. The constitution you're going to hear about tonight is a draft created by 17 people from different professional and social backgrounds. They came together with the objective to do something to contribute to the process to make Catalonia an independent country. Their work became public in January 2015, and civil society was invited to comment and contribute its thoughts about the articles by posting them in the website where the Constitution draft was published. The Catalan National Assembly in the United States has been an extremely privileged observer of this phenomenon, and the DC chapter especially so. In April 2015, we organized a conference in Georgetown called The Case of the Catalans 300 Years On, in which Oriol Vidal Aparicio presented the project and its objectives. In August 2015, we welcomed Sergi Miquel, who informed us about the latest news at that time. Tonight, we're delighted that Constituïm comes to town once again and kindly shares with us the current state of affairs, which includes the delivery of the final draft to the President of the Catalan Parliament, Carme Forcadell. Just a final note before we get started. The Catalan National Assembly is a non-profit organization, and its mission abroad is to inform people all around the world about Catalonia and the Catalans. In a time when the news are full of the race to the White House, we want to let you know that we do not have any super PACs funding us. And this is why we would very much welcome your donations in that red box over there at any time before you leave, so that we can continue organizing great events as the one you are about to take part in tonight. Gracias. So, Eduard, please.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. Marta, thank you. Thank you, the ANC. Thank you for coming tonight. I'm going to try and do 4 things tonight, as briefly and clearly as I can. The first one is try to explain why are we doing this? Why do a bunch of Catalan citizens get together and write a constitution? This talk will not be about why Catalonia wants to be independent. We have seen a lot of progress internationally in the last few years and months, and we're making it to the next step where we're starting to see that the process is quite internationalized, and we're quite happy to hear about that and see that. So now we're going to focus on the specifics of what are the next steps, one of them being particularly what this Catalan constitution might look like. The second one is operational. How did we do it? How did 17 people sit together, gather comments from 3,400 people on the internet, Catalan citizens, and start typing the whole thing? What was the process that we followed? The third one, obviously, is what will we say? What does this constitution include? What makes it new? How does it engage people? And finally, the next steps. And this is for us vital. This constitution is not the constitution of Catalonia. It doesn't pretend to be the constitution of Catalonia. It is a preliminary draft that has to be, if possible, shredded by all of you, so that together we can come up with more ideas and come back to the Parliament with this original document, a whole list of ideas that we have gathered both nationally and internationally, and take it back to the Parliament and say, here you go. This is what we think you should be starting with. So 4 steps. Why are we doing this? How did we do it? What are we actually saying? And what are the next steps? Which is for me the most important part of this presentation, is when I gather your input. So when did we start doing this? What actually happened? When you see something you don't like, you can do 3 things. The first one is to protest. You vent out your anger. You say you're not happy. You go out for drinks. You complain to your friends. This is the first step, right? And the second one goes a bit further. I'm protesting, but what can I do about it? So many people propose ideas. Well, we should be demonstrating, we should be writing the newspapers, we should be organizing ourselves internationally, etc. And the third one is actually participating in making that change happen. And this is what we're trying to achieve. We are only a number of citizens who are trying to protest, propose, and participate in a new idea. So why are we writing a constitution? Why is it so important for a country that doesn't yet exist? The first idea is, I'm going to use a comparison before this, is that of an ox pulling an ox. The Catalan process is a very complex one with lots of moving parts. We take 2 steps forward, 1 step back, sometimes it's 2 steps back, 1 step forward. It's quite a process. And this is where civil society comes in. It's to push Parliament, it's to push the institutions of the Catalan government, because sometimes the ox does not want to move. If the ox doesn't want to move, you push it. You pull it, excuse me. If the ox doesn't want to move, you pull it. If he cannot do it for whatever other reasons, and this is where we also come in, you push it. Writing a constitution would be part of this push and pull play. The Catalan Parliament cannot officially write a constitution. We push it. On the other hand, it sometimes doesn't do it, and it actually promised that by March 2016 it would have already started moving the process of a first draft, which we yet haven't seen. So this is our effort to also pull the ox. The second one is more at the level of ideas. It's to disseminate the concept that Catalonia is a nation. When you talk about euthanasia, when you talk about labor rights, when you talk about parliamentary systems versus other forms of democratic systems, you don't realize, but while we talk about these subjects, we are still within the framework of a constitution. And while we talk about specific subjects, we are actually in the collective imaginary developing the concept that Catalonia is a nation. So it's a very powerful tool in this sense also. The third point is related to these first 2 points, and it's to motivate people to join this idea that Catalonia could be an independent state. Some people want to be Catalans, independent Catalans, for certain reasons. Some are still unconvinced. And instead of going through a nationalist route, we could go through other options, such as developing a concept of a new country. A concept that is very different from the actual idea that we have in Spain. So people could say, we want to be part of this new idea because the political system works better, because the judiciary is independent, or because we think the defense system is more in line with I was thinking of the 21st century, right? So that's the third one, particularly because we're going to have to vote at some point. And when we vote, we want as many people behind us, we want as many people motivated, and not only that, if I remember correctly, it was 11 years between the Declaration of Independence of the United States and the Constitution. We don't want that to happen. We want to make sure that the day we become independent, we already have an idea of which way this country is going in order to facilitate the debate and to get more votes for the yes. So these would be the different reasons why we decided to embark into this adventure. So how did we do this? It's 17 individuals who got together for a series of reasons. It started back in 2010 when the Catalan pro-independence movement was not very happy with the role that the Constitutional Court of Spain played against the famous Estatut of Catalonia. And that's when different people, completely unrelated, started to write different constitutions, each in their own little own area, right? So in 2015, under Judge Santiago Vidal, the three constitutions got together and in the public act started talking and seeing that they had a lot in common, lots of ideas, but that we wouldn't go very far with three different documents. So we all looked at each other and decided to write a formal text by incorporating the ideas of the three texts. So it included three documents, the one from Judge Santiago Vidal, one written by the Engineers for Independence of the ANC, and the third one, a group of jurist economic professors led by Eduard Peris from the University of Arizona. Now, what's important to say is that to do this work, we have done it like we say, gratia et amore. We haven't any financing of any sorts. We have paid every cost from our own pocket for a different number of reasons. The first one is to make sure that political parties would not influence our way of thinking. That for us was something vital from the beginning. And the same thing with political lobbies or economic lobbies, to maintain our independence, because we know that many of these ideas that we have here might not particularly be those that are preferred by the political parties. The second one is that while we say that we are 17, we also say that we are 3,417, because during all this process we have been feeding from a number of comments that people have sent us by the internet, and we make sure to incorporate them, because they reflected the tensions, they reflected the problems, they reflected the situation in Spain, and showed what they didn't want to see in the new country that we're trying to build together. And this is a vital, vital part for us. And last but not least, in total, we have dedicated 2,600 hours of meetings, and apart from the work that we've done on the side to make this happen. So what is the objective? What are we trying to say here? What we're trying to do is present, we have a first draft of the Constitution to the Catalan Parliament. We presented it to Carme Forcadell, and now we will be going across the country in Catalonia and internationally, and I'm insisting on this because it's incredibly important, so that this text might be shredded, might be discussed, so that we can incorporate our ideas. I'm not here to defend them in a particularly strong manner. I'm here to learn. I'm here to incorporate anything you might have, because our idea is to go back in a few months to the Parliament and say, this was our original document, these are all the ideas that people have, and now, Parliament, go do your job, make this happen. We are again pushing and pulling the ox at the same time. I think one of the advantages of this group is that it's extremely heterogeneous. You have lawyers, judges, entrepreneurs, conflict resolution specialists, economists, etc. And because not many of us, we actually only have one professor of constitutional law, is an expert in constitutions, we have been able to incorporate a number of ideas that perhaps originally seemed a bit far-fetched. But we thought that what they did was incorporate what citizens were really interested in. So, having done this brief introduction, let's go a bit into what we're trying to say. How are we establishing this document? What are the different points that we have here? So it's 8 charters, 148 articles. We're aware that it might be a bit long, but we are conscious of it, and we did it because it reflects people's needs, it reflects the preoccupations, it reflects what they think their worries are, right? And it allows for the debate that has to happen in the next few months. So we understand that 148 articles, particularly when you compare it to the American Constitution, is quite a long document, but it is so that we may capture all these ideas and all these worries that current citizens have. So the different charters are rights and liberties, defense and security, economic principles, functions of the republic, territorial organization, electoral processes, citizen participation in the affairs of the state, and constitutional reform, which for us is something particularly important in view of the problems we are having to reform, or have had until now to reform the Spanish Constitution, Actually, one of the reasons this movement came about is because we saw over the past years of the impossibility of reforming the Spanish Constitution and finding a way of fitting into it. Overall, we would say that we have three constitutional pillars that limit the power of the state. Three main pillars. The first one is the utmost respect for human rights. So we really go in depth, and I think we have around a total of 50 articles on individual and collective rights. We talk about health, we talk about education, we talk about security, liberty. We go as far as to talk about reproduction, planned reproduction, euthanasia, family, labor, etc. But what is different here, the reason is we have all this in here, is that unlike the Spanish Constitution, where these are simple suggestions, here it actually becomes executive rights that may be forced into law. So we have these 50 articles where we make sure that we have a constitution that takes care of people's day-to-day lives, both individually and collectively. The second big paradigm change is the environment. The environment is everywhere in our constitution. It might have also a couple articles, but you can find it more or less across the board. It's impregnated by the Earth Charter, for example. One of the first things we did was go to the Earth Charter and make sure that everything we wrote was in line with it. For example, the economic system is regulated by social and ecological considerations. Companies who are particularly mindful of the environment will be the first to get support from the government, for example. And we actually say that it is a duty to make responsible use of common natural resources from an ecological, economic, and social point of view. If you break it, you fix it. Another key point is the ecological prudence principle. If you can harm the environment, you cannot do it. Now, this is very easy to say, and the problems with constitutions is that they sometimes are just a bunch of words and are hard to implement. So what we made sure that we had is an environmental auditor, paid by the state, who will be responsible to ensure that this is key. We have four auditors in total, which I will go into a bit of detail in a bit, but the environmental auditor was for us a fundamental pillar to ensure that this change in the environment that we are seeking to make happen will actually happen and won't just stay in the realm of words. The third one is citizen participation in the affairs of the state. We have trust in the democratic system, just not the way we know it in Spain. And that's the bottom line. Corruption levels are out of the roof, and citizen participation in the affairs of the state are inexistent beyond voting every few years. People do not participate in the political processes beyond voting, and they do not have the chance to do so. This is a major change that we have tried to make. Catalans, just as Americans, are firm believers that democracy is not only representative, but it has to be also participatory and direct. Right now, it is only representative, and we don't think that that suffices. This is actually something we have learned from the US. I think it was President Theodore Roosevelt in his Charter of Democracy speech in 1912 at his Ohio Constitutional Convention who stated, "I believe in the initiative and the referendum, which should be used not to destroy representative government, but to correct it whenever it becomes misrepresentative." Politics has been captured by politicians. We are trying to turn this over. It's, at the end of the day, a question of democratic depth. Democracy must emanate from the people are sovereign. We are not seeing it currently in Spain. We want to make sure that this happens in the future. So how can you do this? How can you make people participate in politics? Another lesson from the US, recall elections. In the US, you have 18 states who have recall elections. This is not something we have right now in Spain. It was actually Abraham Lincoln who said, "We the people are the rightful masters of both Congress and the courts, not to overthrow the Constitution, but to overthrow the men who pervert the Constitution." Any civil servant, elected or not elected, who does not who does not do his job may be recalled. However, he may also present himself to elections again, where we're giving people the chance to call him out and make sure that his job is done. The second point is strong emphasis on participatory and direct democracy, something we are not seeing. So we have a bunch of ideas regarding popular legislative initiatives in order to pass legislation if 5% of voters demand it. Second one is referendums to repeal laws we don't agree with, or even to modify the Constitution. Citizens need to be part of this process, and we've learned this from the Swiss, who since 1891 have done 15 constitutional reforms in this way. So what we've been doing is looking at different constitutions around the world and gathering those ideas that we like. The other one is to ensure that politicians do the work they have to do in the way they have to do it, and it goes back to those national auditors I was telling you about before. We already have a national ombudsman and budget auditors, but we are also including an ecological and election auditors. One of the things that came out constantly when we were discussing with different citizens, and in the comments we got from the 304,000 citizens that expressed an interest in participating in this in our program, was the problem of corruption. One of the key points that we have currently today in Spain. So one of the key changes we're doing is that not only do government representatives that are elective have to explain the assets, declare the assets that they have, but they have to do it 5 years after they are not in office. This works against the concept of revolving doors, because many times favors are done, as we are currently seeing in Spain, once they leave office. Past promises are sometimes kept, unfortunately. However, participatory and direct democracy can be a two-edged sword. We have seen it in the US lately, some comments that are a bit far-fetched for many of us. You need to make sure that things are done in a way that makes sense and under control. It was an American founding father, actually, John Witherspoon, who warned about it, saying, it is very subject to caprice and the madness of popular rage, right? We have to be very careful with this. So we also thought of how we could ensure that we put in a series of checks and balances to the participation of the people. The first is we are going to limit the possibilities of making changes when you have a state of alarm, an emergency, or a siege. This is when people usually get flustered, and this is when hot ideas come, and we have to make sure that they don't happen too quickly. The second is that you need pretty high quotas to be able to make the changes. At the end of the day, you don't want the legislative power to be completely blocked by potential initiatives that come from the population. So you have to strike that balance. And we realized while working that the pendulum was swinging from one side to the other. It went from hops to lock, from lock to hops constantly, and we had to work to find the middle ground, right? The other one is that depending on the level of change that we're trying to achieve, the different steps that have to be undertaken vary. It's not the same thing of trying to do some constitutional reform, to implement some constitutional reform mechanisms of the foundational rights, or the first charter like rights and liberties, or the election cycle, or even constitutional reform, than others that perhaps do not have that importance, right? So what do we propose there? A National Constitutional Assembly. If major changes have to be made in the Constitution, you will have a combination of citizens and members of Parliament who will have to work together, total of 50 people, and 3/5 of them will have to agree on the text before it actually is sent out to a referendum. And of course, referendum in democracy we think is 50% plus one vote. But we will ensure that the citizens may participate in this process all over. Right? So this is a bit the triangle that we have at first. Right? The rights, human rights, first and foremost, making sure they're respected, and a large variety of these rights. Second is the environment. This is the topic of the 21st century, and if we don't take care of it, all this doesn't really matter at the end of the day. And the third one is making sure that citizens, again, have a right and the means to participate in the political process. Having said this, there are a number of other points that I think are worth discussing briefly. The first one is that we have a parliamentary system in Spain right now, and we will change it to a presidential system. Now, when I say we will change it, again, I insist, we are making a proposal. Right? It will be one house. We are proposing one house under a presidentialist system. Why? We go back to the US. We look at Andrew Jackson. What did Andrew Jackson say? He said it was settled by the Constitution, the laws, and the whole practice of the government that the entire executive power is vested in the President of the United States. We disregarded other models because we have the feeling they don't guarantee the full separation of powers. Is what we're seeing right now, again, currently in Spain, where the president is elected by the government, by the parliament. So there isn't that real separation of powers. The other advances of a presidential system is that it legitimizes the president for what I just mentioned, right? He is chosen directly by the people. He is not chosen by the parliament itself, but by the people. And this, in the collective mindset, is a huge difference. However, unlike the US, we don't give him veto power. We want to make sure that the legislative body still has a function, still has a right to work. We already have citizens participating in the process through a number of referendums, etc. But let's not forget that Parliament also has a key role to play. The other one is that we're quite ashamed of what is happening in Spain right now, or what happened in Belgium a few years ago. We don't have a president. We don't have a president because political parties are not capable of stopping their bickering and getting back to work. What's the conclusion? We're having elections again. We might be having them again in October, who knows, because we don't see that, we're not expecting many changes in the votes that are going to come, right, in the upcoming elections of June. A presidential election with fixed election dates guarantees that you always have a president and an executive that is working. However, a president shouldn't get overexcited either. 2 election cycles. Same with the parliament. Being a politician cannot be a profession. We want people to have experience before, we want people to have experience after. Right now, everybody in Spain is a professional politician with no professional experience outside of politics. By having a double mandate of 10 years maximum, election cycles of 5 years, we hope to put a bit of a pause on that. And also it is a way of fighting corruption. Another key aspect is the independence of the judiciary system. It was Alfonso Guerra, a Spanish minister, who amazingly enough was proudly stated that Montesquieu is dead and buried. He's right. The judiciary system in Spain is not independent. And this is one of the key problems that we have right now. So how do you ensure that you can have an operating judiciary system that is independent from the other functions? Well, just like a father and his son, make sure he's economically independent. So this is one of the key changes. This is a paradigm shift that we're proposing, where you will have a budget for the judiciary who comes straight as a percentage of GDP. The percentage will be discussed in Parliament, will be set by law, but that budget will go straight to the judiciary and will not be negotiated constantly. It will come straight from the GDP, allowing the judiciary system to organize itself independently. The other one is that instead the Attorney General, as well as the President of the Supreme Court, will be elected directly by the citizens. He needs to be close to the citizens. He may not be close to the political parties. The moment people will start seeing that association, they will run away from him. We want to ensure that he's seen as an independent figure. After all, it's Catalan Kennedy who said that the bedrock of democracy is the rule of law, and that means an independent judiciary, judges who can make decisions independently, and most and foremost, independently of the political winds that are blowing. And we don't have this in Spain, where you have a constitutional tribunal who is simply doing what the executive is saying. And unless we have an independent judiciary system, I don't think it is worth fighting for a new country. So this is another one of our key pillars. Curiously enough, when we've been discussing this text among us and in Barcelona, Catalonia, one of the comments that has popped up the most and created the most controversy was the concept of defense, whether we should have an army or not. This was in everyone's mouth. And newspapers took the soundbite and moved in one way or another. And it stirred and created a tremendous amount of debate. And what we think is that, first and foremost, the Republic of Catalonia is a nation of peace, and it shall guarantee the defense and security of its citizens and territory. So this is not a happy flowers like we tend to say approach. First and foremost, the defense of the citizens must be guaranteed. However, what we also do say is that we don't think the 19th century militaries are useful for a country like Catalonia. Look at us geographically. We have Spain on one side, Andorra, and France. These are not enemies. These will be partners. We don't expect Spanish or French tanks coming into Catalonia. And if they do, there's not much we can do anyway. We might as well look for other tools in order to make sure that that doesn't happen. We don't believe in those 19th century defense systems. And why? Because you look at Paris, you look at Brussels. The threats that these countries face currently could not be stopped with traditional armies. However, we do think that a national security agency is necessary. And this agency should be an umbrella agency that includes a number of agencies that are ready to act upon 21st century threats: cybercrime, violent extremism, political extremism, mafias, refugees. These are the specific problems that a country like Catalonia will face in the future. And we don't think that you can do anything against these problems with a traditional military. We think you can do it with a strong diplomatic corps. We think you can do it with intelligence. We think you can do it with strong partners, with a very strong guard corps also, and with our famous Mossos d'Esquadra, which are like a gendarmerie, which are armed and ready to do those tasks that they may do. But a traditional military, we just don't see it right now. But on the other hand, we also have to be ready to support our allies internationally. What stronger image is there than a country that has gained its independence without firing a bullet to help solve conflicts internationally? We would like to position ourselves internationally as a player that resolves conflicts peacefully through an International Institute of Peace and Truce that will implement development and conflict resolution solutions. Again, our idea is not to do wars, it is to find solutions to existing conflicts, and this is how we think we can play a role abroad. Another key discussion was language. With defense, language was the other big topic. First and foremost, what we say is that nobody can be discriminated because of the language they will use. Everybody in Catalonia can use indistinctively whatever language they want. This is a sign of richness for us. However, we also have to be cognizant that the UN has published a report saying that in the next 50 years, 50% of languages will disappear. If Catalan is to survive, if a small state has to have its own language, it needs to be the official language. The idea is that Catalan will be the official and national language of Catalonia, and that Spanish, however, will have a legal regime that shall respect and guarantee the linguistic rights of Catalans. So, official language for Catalonia, for Catalan, and a particularly strong defense of one of our sources of riches, which is Spanish. This doesn't mean that Catalan will not be spoken. It simply means that when you go to the administration, when you talk with the state, you will do so in Catalan. TV will still be in Spanish or Catalan. Conversations in the street will still be Spanish or Catalan. This won't really change. The private sphere will not change at all. It is just the contact that you have with the state. It is the only way that a small country has to ensure that its language can survive with globalization in the 21st century. However, people who were born before 1977, who came to Catalonia before that from different parts of Spain, perhaps don't speak Catalan. And they are as Catalan as any one of us. They will have a protected right to use Spanish in front of the administration. Why 1977? Because that is when the schooling system was changed from a Spanish system to a Catalan system. Anyone born after 1977 went and underwent a Catalan schooling system and knows how to use Catalan. Hence, there's no need for him to do that in Spanish. This is why we're trying to navigate between these two waters. Another key aspect for us is the concept of gender. We went back and forth a lot of whether we should have a few articles on gender, and we decided to disregard it because we wanted to emphasize it across the document, across the Constitution. It is so important, just as the environment, and we face so many gender problems in Spain in so many different ways that we wanted to ensure that the whole document was impregnated with gender rights. For example, the Republic shall ensure gender equality in employment, training, professional promotions, working conditions, etc. And you cannot have any sort of discrimination based on pregnancy or maternity. I don't understand, for example, why when a couple has a kid, it should always be the mother that takes maternity leave and the father keeps on working on his career. That is something that the couple should figure out themselves, for example, right? Schools will be co-educational. You won't have boys' schools and girls' schools. We need to make sure that we keep that balance in schools also. And as importantly, we make a key point for us in the Constitution is that you have to act comprehensively and effectively against all sorts of domestic and gender violence that we see. And this is again a major issue that we see in Spain, constantly in the first pages of the news, and that we together need to fight. Going back to another incredibly hot topic is who gets to be a Catalan. Catalan nationality, we decided, would be acquired through a number of ways. There's the American system, there's the French system, there's the Swiss system. We actually think that it should be acquired by birth, affiliation, adoption, matrimony, or residency, or even by choice. We open the possibilities here. Another thing we think is incredibly important is that why should we limit the Catalan, what we call Catalans of origin, the original citizens of the new state, to those that are Spanish citizens? Why couldn't someone from Somalia who has been living for a number of years in Barcelona, why should he have the right of becoming a Catalan citizen just as someone who comes from Madrid or who comes from Paris? So we are ensuring that anyone who has been living in Catalonia for 5 years and is a legal resident will automatically also be a Catalan, will hold a Catalan passport. Anyhow, I could go on and on. These are just a number of ideas for you to think about. I hope you've been able to go through them a bit. And right now, the objective again is for you really to tell me what you think about these ideas so that we can go back and include them in our proposal, right? Because after all, as Jesse Jackson said, deliberation and debate is the way you stir the soul of democracy. And this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to stir that soul which has been completely blocked since the 70s in Spain. Thank you very much. So, what I'd like to do now is take your ideas, have a discussion. Discussions don't have to be one way, they can be between us, but the different options that we discussed. And at the end of the day, help us make Catalonia a better country. Floor is open.
What about NATO?
How should we take the questions? Should we do them one by one? Can you perhaps help me with the questions? You can organize the questions perhaps? Okay. Yeah? So, NATO. Through a referendum, the Catalan people will decide if they want to be part of NATO, like any international treaty.
Do you want the United States endorse the Catalan independence in this case?
Excuse me?
Do you want that if United States endorse the independence of Catalonia if maybe Catalonia rejected NATO?
Well, that is not for me to say, right? At the end of the day, what matters is our people, right? First and foremost. We do think, however, that there shouldn't be many difficulties in joining an organization like NATO, but that has to be decided by our people, and we can't really change that, right? Of course, there are political considerations to these decisions. We think there are even stronger political considerations if we don't give our people the option of deciding how this has to be done, because perhaps then we won't even be able to become independent, right? Having said this, people will have to decide that through a referendum.
Yes, but what's your opinion about the role of the United States in this process?
Well, the role of the United States, like any other big actor, is incredibly important. This is one of the reasons I'm here today, obviously, right? And we need to get the support of as many allies as possible in our quest. But I also think that a country like the United States, more than any else, will understand the concept of we the people. And if I remember correctly, in 1986, Spain voted to become part of NATO, and they didn't put any barriers to that vote. Why? Because it's quite clear, or we'll see what people think at the end of the day, that would now just be my particular opinion, that has absolutely nothing to do with what this document has to be, that there might be a general interest of joining NATO. But again, this is something that will have to be put out for decision. Now, what I think what's important to say about this constitution is that nobody's happy with it. We tend to say that someone who's, it can accommodate people that are quite to the left and quite to the right, but if everybody was happy with it, then we would have done something wrong. So we went back and forth with a number of issues, and within the group, some said actually that perhaps we should incorporate those international treaties automatically, right? Others thought it wasn't a good idea, and in the end we decided that international agreements should be done through a referendum. But I take your point, and it's something that, of course, we would be happy to take back.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I will try to bring some provocative issues here, but it doesn't mean that I'm in disarray. First question, and this is quite provocative. Are you sure that you guys in Catalonia, it's not in bed with the same problems that Spanish politics have? And this is quite, why I'm asking this, I come from a country that spent 25 years under military dictatorship and went out in the mid-80s. In 1988, we had a constitutional parliament that made a constitution designed as a social democracy. At that time, some different concerns showed me, but you guys are going on this way, trying to bring people into an understanding on a document. And if you're fair on the assessment of what people under it really are, you can come up with something that temporarily bring people together, and 20, 30 years later, that becomes a point of tension between people, because you try to solve some very deep cultural issues on the documents, and this kind of things are quite complicated to deal with. The US Constitution is quite clear with some very basic rights, and there's a struggle on almost all the other things. For example, same-sex marriage, etc. There's interpretation on it. In my country, we have a basic decimal constitution with 250 articles, more transitory provisions of another 100. And they're still on since 1988. So this is a very important issue. Your document, okay, it plays a political role right now, but the big question, aren't you on the same page on the rest of Spain? This is very provocative. Second point, I really am not sympathetic to the idea of avoiding professional politicians. Here in the US, for example, Bernie Sanders can be considered a professional politician. And it seems to be a good guy from the social democratic point of view. I'm not a voter here, so and one kind of complication is when, okay, you have to stimulate people to participate, more the better, but restrict that the citizen has to be a politician for a short time and then go back to the society, open the space. I'm not so sure, and this can bring further complications, especially a complication of not having an establishment. And here I come to the US once again. One good thing in the US, is having a very professional establishment. This is, I think, is the higher achievement of this country. I would have another.
I'm not quite sure I got that third one. Could you please summarize me the third one? I'm not quite sure I got that third one.
The making of a political establishment, in my benchmark US, as you guys are benchmarking in several things, I think this is one of the biggest achievements of this country. Having a very professional political establishment. This is not, of course, a fashion opinion right now, but it's the thing that I share. And make some very complicated negotiations. The US is a very big country, 50 states, etc. Very complicated negotiations going through, let us say, some normal directions that can assure you an outcome. And last point, complete independence of the judiciary, you have to combine it because checks and balances are crucial. Complete independence among the powers. How would you establish the checks and balances? This, I think, is I'm sorry to be so long.
Yes. Let me take it one by one. 1030 years. It's exactly what we're seeing with the Spanish Constitution right now. The Constitution is so rigid, you simply cannot modify it. And it's just creating tension after tension after tension that is unresolved. When you look at the proposal that we have, which is actually being translated and should be posted on our webpage in a couple of weeks, we have a whole charter on how the Constitution can be modified. A whole charter. Meaning that 1/8 of the Constitution is dedicated to how we can make those changes to ensure that this doesn't happen. Now, what we do make sure is that these changes are implemented depending on the importance that they may have. The requirements are not the same whether you want to touch an article under the economic system than under basic human rights. Right? And if you touch something under basic human rights, you go through a bit more of a complex system, which I was explaining before, right? But we do have this whole charter that allows for constitutional reform, right? That's the first one. Avoiding professional politicians. Again, the team went back and forth with this, and in the comments that we gathered from citizens, we saw that a bunch of people were saying that you should have professional politicians. However, the downside of this is that the levels of corruption can be very, very high, because they stay in the system for a very long time, on the one hand, right? So what can we do about this? What we do is limit it to 2 terms for the president and for Parliament. We still prefer not to run the risk of falling into all these corrupt systems that we have had until now, because the problem we have seen with the political parties in Spain is that you just don't get fresh ideas. It's the same people over and over again. It's only when you potentially have a new party that new ideas kick in. Right? So we still prefer that idea of having a political group. What's the word I'm looking for? You want political men, right, that are elected, that are not professionals, but what you have underneath is a strong bureaucracy, and that strong bureaucracy can withhold the state. Right? And then the independence of the judiciary. again, we did go, but that's a good question, because we went back and forth constantly on this, because in certain countries, if you give the judiciary too much independence, it actually becomes an oligarchy, where all the decisions are made. And we were actually speaking to a group of constitutional makers in Africa, who were saying, my issue is not about making the judiciary independent. My issue is about keeping it under control, right? So we gave that some thought, and what we have is a control mechanism where we have what we call the House of Control that makes sure that it's there to make sure that the judiciary does the job it has to do, which is independent from it. So there's a group within the judiciary elected independently, right, who is led by one of these auditors that I mentioned before, who ensures that the judiciary is doing the work within the terms established in the law, on the one hand. On the other hand, we also have the elected Attorney General and the elected President of the Supreme Court to ensure that there's movement there, 2 terms maximum also, and that you will have that change and can't have that oligarchical system.
We have another bunch of problems with it.
So you mentioned how human rights are front and center within this new constitution. That's a wonderful thing. But one right, which in my opinion seems to be the most important human right that you didn't mention at all, was the freedom of speech. We have so many countries around the world that find loopholes and legal technicalities to prevent people from speaking out against their governments and the things that those governments do wrong. What protections will there be in Catalonia?
Guaranteed by the Constitution is one of the first articles, freedom of speech. Absolutely. Freedom of the press also. Non-negotiable. And one of the reasons we particularly gave it a lot of thought is because one of our judges, Santiago Vidal, who was working in his free time on one of these constitutional drafts, was put aside by the Spanish tribunal, saying that what he was doing was out of line, and we just considered it as part of free speech. So we want to ensure that even people who work in the judiciary have the right to free speech. We take it that far.
So I have 2 questions. They start from the perspective of someone who doesn't follow very closely Catalan politics and what's happening in Catalonia, but is more generally aware of it from friends. First is, if I was in your position, I think I would speak with the same level of confidence about something I'm very passionate about. But since I'm not, I'm wondering, so you mentioned at a point on defense that a 19th century style army would not be suitable for Catalonia given its threat and so on. But let's imagine a scenario in which Spain goes to Vladimir Putin and says, Mr. Putin, how did you do in Ukraine? Because you didn't invade with an army, you had kind of a sort of hybrid type of thing, and Spain gets very upset about this because at the end of the day, you could argue it's a secessionist type of thing. How would you counteract that? Or what was your perspective on the situation in which the sort of response is more of coercive?
Okay, so there's quite a black swan here. Putin reaches an agreement with Spain.
No, it's basically saying that the same tactics involved in invading Ukraine and annexing the part of Ukraine which did not involve in any way a rash sort of a 19th century style army could be applied somewhere else. And why not? I mean, of course, it's sort of an imaginary exercise. But you seem to be very certain that Spain will be a partner, that nothing like this will happen. And then from a perspective of someone who's not following this on a day-to-day basis, it seems to be a bit of a wishful thinking. It can be wrong, of course, at this point.
Yeah, it's a potential scenario that is valid as any other that we can come up with. I would say that one of the key aspects we have to keep in mind is that Spain is part of the European Union. And Spain is within the economic system of the EU, and the moment it would do something like this, it would automatically be kicked out of the European Union. So that would be a possibility. That would be something that would make this scenario particularly difficult, right? And especially because most of the Spanish trade routes go through Catalonia. So it would be very difficult for Catalonia to defend itself against a Spanish invading army, absolutely. But the consequences in Spain would be even higher. And then, since we're talking realpolitik now, we would have to see it what Germany would say, we would have to see what France would say, etc., because you would be playing with stability right at the underbelly of Europe. So I would be very surprised that Spain could get away with it with France and Germany as close, right? It's something for me that is, first of all, I can't picture that as Spain being an enemy of Catalonia, because this is an absolutely peaceful process. But if it happened, even if it was Spain, not Spain, another potential attacker, invader, you name it as you want, we would have to confront them with a series of tools that the Ukrainians have been trying to do, which is diplomacy, which is through a number of other channels, such as intelligence, etc. You can't hold that army back. Sure, we can have an army, we can have 20 F-18s. Problem with an F-18 in Barcelona is that it takes off, and before you know it, it's over Lisbon. So it's not really helpful for us, right? And there are many other mechanisms that one can use in order to counter potential threats like this. And it's exactly what the Ukrainians are doing right now, right? They haven't really tried to invade because it's just not the solution they have.
One comment and two further questions. I mean, I think on the issue of professional politicians, I think there's no golden bullet and no solution. I mean, you can put a term limit, but then at the end of the day, your candidate needs to have a living. So after 5 or 10 years in the politics, you have to find an arrangement. So I think Switzerland may have a limit like that, but then when you see the CVs of the politicians, well, they are either all civil servants, or teachers, or lawyers, because that's a profession that allows them to leave for X years and come back. So either way, I think you will always have a problem on that. So two questions. One, I'm an economist, so like my neighbor, I'm saluting and commending the parts of human rights, but you also put sort of freedom of speech is sort of relatively cheap to give, although it may be politically difficult. But when you talk about health, education, what are the sort of the implications of putting these rights in the Constitution? That means that implicitly the future government of Catalonia will offer this service for free because it's a right defended by the Constitution. Have you run the numbers? If you could elaborate on that. And the second question is, well, there is a French Catalonia across the border. I wonder what's the position of Paris on what's going on. I mean, when you say that if you're Catalan of a culture, you would have the Catalan passport, would a French Catalan from Languedoc who speaks perhaps Catalan also cross the border and ask, or what is the sound that you hear from the other side of the Pyrenees?
This is a particularly interesting point. And how did we, what did we try to do this? Spain offers double citizenship with most of South America. Like Yusangi, right? Former immigrants, etc., that went to South America, etc. And they have that at their nation-to-nation agreement. What we think we have to do is offer the possibility to people that have cultural links with Catalonia the option of becoming Catalan citizens, even though the other side doesn't offer them dual citizenship. So we're quite clear on that. We don't know, we haven't talked to Paris about this. We are not taking them French, in this case French, because we're thinking of different areas that also have a Catalan influence, not only in France, like this. We could be looking at different parts of the Mediterranean, different parts of Spain, etc. What we do know is that we will not be asking for reciprocity of dual citizenship. That's our proposal. That people who have, people I'm speaking, not countries, only people who have that cultural link with Catalonia, if they want, will have access to Catalan citizenship. We don't think it should be a major issue for the other countries because we are not taking away their nationality and we don't require the recognition either, right? Dual citizenship in any case, reciprocity. Regarding running the numbers and the rights, we have seen progressive democracies offer a number of rights and keeping them. Thinking of the Nordic countries, thinking of I'm thinking of Sweden, I'm thinking of Denmark, I'm thinking even to a certain extent Finland, etc. These economies that the Catalans have a tendency to look towards, and these models seem to work. We have an economy that works, it has always worked. It in the past represented a very large amount of Catalan GDP, but for a series of reasons that I won't go into now, is now a bit lower, and we are convinced that with our independence, our economical freedom will increase substantially, right? Hence, when we look at those Nordic countries, we see that those figures can be run and that they work, and why can't we offer something similar? We don't see that there's something particular about Denmark that there wouldn't be in a country like Catalonia that has extremely high rates of education, etc., etc. So we feel particularly confident that that could happen. Regarding professional politicians, there's exactly no golden bullet. I do think it's a point that I'm going to take back with me for further discussion. It's a very good point. What we did include, now that I recall, is a support to politicians going back to the private sector. That can be in terms of training, or the law will have to define that. But we do want to prepare that landing for them. It won't be a golden parachute, obviously, but there has to be some support, because if a politician, at the end of the day, what we intend is that he's serving his country, the country should also be giving him a hand when he returns. So that is a constitutional provision that by law there will have to be some support to these politicians going back.
I have two questions. One is related to gender. I thought it was interesting that you said that gender is going to be more mainstreamed within the Constitution rather than having specific articles. And I was wondering if the proposed Constitution, or the draft Constitution, I should say, also has enumerated other grounds of potential discrimination, such as sexual orientation, race, nationality, and so on. And then my other question related to gender is whether the Constitution includes quotas for women on Parliament or on party list. And then lastly, I was wondering whether there's been any discussions about who can become president. I know you talked already about who can actually become a Catalan citizen, but perhaps, like in the US, the rules are actually different for who can become president.
Discrimination is one of the key points of the Constitution also. Gender, race, sexual orientation, it's all in there. Not only that, we open up the concept of family. So even in articles that talk about the concept of family, we don't limit it to a man or woman. It could be all sorts of different families. So, and other sorts of discrimination is there. Gender discriminations are particularly covered through this aspect. And particularly, unfortunately, because of what happened in Orlando, we're thinking a bit about that, right? How do we avoid discrimination also? By ensuring that and I didn't have much time to talk about this earlier, by ensuring that we have an educational system where discrimination does not happen. So that is something fundamental for us. We don't want schools separated in sexes, for example. We want an educational system where critical thinking is emphasized, so that students can reach their own conclusions through a humanistic formation. So to train through humanism, not just learning a number of subjects. We want them to learn how to think. And when you start thinking, discrimination is something that stops going through your head. So it's discrimination of all sorts is all over the Constitution. I'd have to check. I don't believe we have quotas for women. We don't have quotas for women. It's something that we haven't considered. It might be something interesting to keep in mind, something to take back. We hope they won't be necessary. I would have to go back to you and look at different constitutions to see what the status on that is, because right now we don't have them. Who can become president? Anyone who's a Catalan. Period. It's not like Arnold Schwarzenegger, right? If you're a Catalan, you can be president of Catalonia.
Well, thank you. I wanted to congratulate you. I think you gave us a very good overview. I've read the text, and I'm not a constitutional lawyer, but there's three things that worry me. The first one is the judiciary, that the judiciary or any element of the judiciary might be elected. That's, unless you have a model for another constitution, well, show that we see now with politicians. That's one. The second one is the legal insecurity that I think would arise from direct democracy. I think that you mentioned that in relation to Switzerland. Switzerland is a homogeneous population mostly. It has 4 cantons. It's a European country. It doesn't have, in fact, is very limiting of foreign different ethnic groups. Catalonia is very open. So a 5% capacity, of 5% ability to question or to recall some aspect of the Constitution, that if that is open, that will happen constantly. So in my view, it would lead to absolute legal insecurity because there would be no working ability to have what would happen with the decision. Would it be stayed? Would it be interrupted? Would it be not implemented? That's the other thing that I'm worried about. The third one and the last one was, actually I think these were the two. No, and the third one was NATO, this gentleman's question. For example, in maritime security, Catalonia, the territory or the space, political and geographical space that Catalonia would have, does not end at the low water mark. It ends 200 nautical miles seaward. And therefore, there would have to be a maritime force, which I think my colleague will be better qualified to comment than me. But there would have to be, at least in international fora, where you want to participate, Catalonia would want to participate, in order to have a seat at the table, you have to actually have maybe some maritime enforcement, and whether that's structured as a military or not depends on the decision, but you would be expected in those fora to actually have a semblance of a maritime force, either a coast guard or a navy or a quasi-navy or some type of force that would be equal in order to, and equally professionally trained in order to sit at the table and have a voice. Otherwise, they will not be invited. They will not have a seat at the table. They will not be able to participate. And of course, I love Catalonia. We love it to be able to survey and protect its maritime domain. So I don't know if these are things. I did not finish, you see. I need to go back and read the Constitution and see if those points have been raised there.
We completely agree with the last point. The National Agency of Defense is an umbrella where you can have this Coast Guard. As the US knows better than anyone, a Coast Guard is much more than a few boats that will help fishermen out. The US Coast Guard is all over the world. It's been in the Mediterranean. It's been even further than the Mediterranean. And we won't go into details here. There's no need, right? But we also agree that we need a strong Coast Guard to enforce 21st century problems. Migration is a huge one of them. We're seeing it all across the Mediterranean. We have to be able to do something about that, particularly to fight the mafias that are organizing all of that. So yes, if the experts that are in charge of foreign policy decide that there needs to be a very strong Coast Guard, there's nothing that does not allow them to do so. So we absolutely agree with that. Just as you need to have a strong gendarmerie, which in our case, which are what we call the Mossos Squadra, who have to be able to face any threat that happens on Catalan territory. So yes, the answer is we would. I suppose there's room, just put it this way, there's room in the document, in our proposal, to have a strong Coast Guard. Yes. Direct democracy, I think I tried to cover it a bit, the famous pendulum, the risks that you could have. And there are a number of provisions to ensure that that can't happen. For example, if an idea is brought up and it's a no, you can't present it in the course of the next 12 months. So you can't constantly have new ideas coming up that are very similar. You are constitutionally protected to ensure that doesn't happen. 5% is not much, that's true. But if a change is more important, like a change in the Constitution, then you need a 10%. Right? So you do have these quotas that you could play with, and of course, who knows if these quotas will be sufficient in the future. We're seeing the internet is changing the way people participate in politics, the way they vote, etc. So perhaps it can be easy to reach that 5 or 10% for a number of issues, and this is why you have a constitutional system that may be changed, and you could change these quotas if we see that they are not sufficient, or to implement different mechanisms if they don't work. Because what we see is that we think that for today these quotas would work, they would be sufficient. If we see 15, 20 years down the road that they are not, then the first step would be to do a constitutional modification that would allow to change these quotas and find something that better represents the times that we have in the future. If everybody's voting in the internet, you can have a change.org and suddenly 15% of the people, yes. And the other point is, as I said, you cannot do anything like this in times of siege, etc. That's another way of breaking that barrier. But obviously direct democracy may lead to legal insecurity, but we think there's even more security when citizens are not allowed to participate in the affairs of the state. So at the end of the day, it's a trade-off, but first, at the end of the day, the citizens own the government, and we think they should be represented with these checks and balances, of course, right? I'd be happy to discuss with you if you had particular ideas of how we could limit, because you read the text, if there were particular limits that you would impose, particular ideas that you haven't seen in the text, please come to me and tell me, because we'd be happy to incorporate them and pass them along. Anyone in the judiciary might not be elected. A judge will not be elected. An attorney will not be elected. The Attorney General will be elected. The judges of the Supreme Court will be elected. The President is elected, and the rest of the Supreme Court is elected by a combination of parliamentary approvals and the President and his peers. So we try to get a bit of everything there. One of the things we're trying to change, which we noticed in Spain, it doesn't really answer your question, but I think you'll relate to me, is that right now, to become a judge, it is a memoristic exercise. You just have to learn one article after another and hope that you will be treated kindly by a tribunal who usually has a tendency of putting people they know, etc., which is an incredibly unfair system, and you find yourself with judges who have no experience whatsoever of the real world. We want to change that. We want to ensure that people who become judges will have to have shown that they know how to work within the legal system and have legal system experience. So we impose a certain number of years of real life experience, like it's done in many other countries like the UK, etc. So we're shifting away from the Spanish paradigm there.
Yeah, have a follow-up on that. But then I'm very impressed with your answers, and thank you for addressing them. But the last one, then you need to actually change the entire legal system, because you're going to have a completely different type of judge there.
Meaning a completely different judge?
Yes, if the judge, the top judges, the high magistrates and top judges are elected, in order to have, you'll have to change the whole process of professional career that exists now. It's a career. You cannot just go, like in this system, in the Anglo-Saxon system, you can be an attorney, you can be a prosecutor, and then you can become a judge. That cannot happen in Spain. In Spain, it has to be the career, so far the way it is now, and the way it is in Catalonia. So it means that the structure of the 5 careers, that are the 5 legal careers, is also going to be changed.
I would say everything we'll do will require adaptation. We're creating a new country here, so there definitely has to be adaptation, and this is the reason we're developing all these transitional laws, right? We haven't been able to go into specific details of how we will be adapting every decision that is made outside of this document, again, because this will not be the final document. This is just a proposal of what we think could work in an independent country in order to gather the popular support for this new concept, right? It's a very good point. I agree with what you're saying. There's a risk, particularly in the judiciary, that it could change things. I don't think we're going as far as changing the whole system. We're changing the way people have access to the system. A judge is a judge. We're not going to de-Ba'athify the whole judiciary system that we have in Spain, because there are very good professional judges that have done good work until now. There's no risk there at all. There's nothing in here that might say that. What we are saying is that the new people that are coming in will have to enter with this new system.
So first I'd like to speak in defense of direct democracy, because nothing scares a corrupt politician more than direct democracy. The reason why this system works is because the people speak, and they speak clearly. Then the assembly has no choice but to listen to what they say. And the further that you move away from the people having a voice and saying what they want to see, the more corrupt things automatically become. But my question is, you seem pretty confident that the EU is going to be backing Catalonia, backing this constitution, when the EU ideologically is set up to oppose you. The EU naturally is against any sort of local independence movement. They want to have more power, more centralized. How would you move forward if the EU publicly chose to oppose Catalonia?
The EU has not publicly opposed Catalonia.
In the
Right.
hypothetical.
There are many hypotheticals. I think any European state would welcome a peaceful democratic process like the one we're living. I think we're an example worldwide of how a transition can be made without firing a single bullet, which is something extraordinary that is rarely seen, right? We have to work very hard to show why we can be an asset for the European Union. We shouldn't be seen as a threat, we should be seen as an asset. And this is what we need to work all together towards. Are there potential people that are against the Catalan case? Of course, there are also people that are in favor, and we need to start working in order to build those alliances, and especially in order to educate the European Union to see that we are under no circumstances a threat. On the contrary, we would become a very strong ally for the European Union, and would be very happy to work within its framework if we were given the possibility. But yes, in general, in political science, any change of the status quo is hard to do. But there are so many changes happening right now that who knows what could happen, right? Let's see what happens with the Brexit. We'll see what happens with Scotland's position. And I haven't heard anyone saying that if Brexit happens, Scotland would not be able to re-enter the European Union, for example. Why would then, if Scotland hypothetically, because we're talking hypothetically here, if Scotland hypothetically rejoined the European Union, why couldn't Catalonia do it, right?
Thank you.
I know you left it flexible, but do you have like a timeline, a time frame in mind? That's one question. Second question, it's kind of interesting what I heard about the Catalonia North, and I have one similar. What would say somebody who lives or was born in the Franja de Ponent would have access to, would have the right to become living in the Franja de Ponent Catalan citizenship?
Okay. Our time frame has nothing to do with the official political time frame that the Spanish government is putting in place. We are acting, as I said before, more as this, remember the analogy I was mentioning before, the cart with the ox, right? We are as citizens of the state, we're just making sure that the process moves along and we're pushing it. So if the ox doesn't want to move, we're going to pull it. If it can't move because it has too much weight, this tool is pushing it, right? Our own agenda, our own personal agenda as far as it can go, is to ensure that we motivate people to participate in this process, that we get as many inputs as possible across the country, so that, going back to the time frame, end of the year, December, perhaps January, February, we will go back to the Parliament with this text, with all the comments I'm getting today and elsewhere, and give it back to, and return it to the Parliament, so that they can use it if they decide to do so. Because we always say in Catalan, no som ningú, we are nobody. This is just a private initiative that is gathering, we have to say, a lot of speed and strength with partners like the ANC, and both nationally, internationally, etc. But our role is on the civil society side, and we can only have our own agenda related to civil society. Having said that, we are pushing and pulling our politicians, like I think many Catalans who want independence currently are. Franja de Ponent.
Maybe you should explain the concept.
Yes.
I don't know if...
Please go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Franja de Ponent is a territory that is on the border between Catalonia and Spain, in this case Aragon, where you have a bunch of people who have historical, linguistical, cultural ties with Catalonia.
And they speak Catalan.
And speak Catalan, absolutely.
And where is this located?
West of
Catalonia.
You see the map of Spain in Catalonia. West of, it's a kind of a piece of land along, say, the province of Lerida in Tarragona.
four.
Here is the deliberation. Huesca?
Yes, yes.
Would be part of the.
So there's a key point here, is that our proposal, which can be modified, does it offer citizenship to everyone who lives in La Franja, everyone who lives in Valencia, which is south of Catalonia, or even in some Mediterranean islands where Catalan is still spoken, or in the south of France. We don't contemplate this possibility to just give it to anyone who lives there. The agreement is not a country-to-country thing. However, we do offer the possibility to citizens who have a demonstrated relationship, culturally, socially, linguistically, with Catalonia, to become Catalan citizens. So the law will determine exactly how this would happen, but the text already says that this has to be passed, right? And there might be, we have to see how this is done. But these citizens will be eligible to become Catalan citizens, even though they are Spanish citizens, because they live outside of the borders. So it's a citizen thing. This is a key difference. It's citizens. It's not anyone who is part of Spain or France, etc. It's those citizens that have those cultural ties.
Thank you for doing this. Two brief questions. One, echoing the Supreme Court and the electability of the Supreme Court. It actually has been done here in a number of U.S. states, and we've seen that it does get highly politicized. Even when judicial candidates are not allowed to announce parties on the ballot, they're campaigned for by parties, they're supported by parties, and it is a challenge here in the U.S. that many states have to deal with. And then second, is a question, I don't know whether you've considered it, but the idea of compulsory voting, making voters or having a small fine associated with not voting to encourage voters, especially when direct democracy is such a cornerstone of the nation, or the potential new nation.
First point, you tell me, what can we do against this? How can you make sure that the Supreme Court is not highly politicized? What are the actions that are being taken in the U.S.? What recommendations would you have for us?
I'm not an expert on it. I guess my only thought is that was one of the considerations for the Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court, why they are not elected and why they serve life tenure. The idea of a president of the Supreme Court or a president of the highest court being required to face the voters after making an unpopular but correct decision was always something that is very challenging. And we've seen it in a number of states. I'm from North Carolina, and our Supreme Court is elected. And it's controlled by the dominant political party in the state, and it's very clear which direction the Supreme Court is going to rule on a number of issues based on their party ideology. They're supported by parties. Party sample ballots endorse these candidates. It's a very transparent in that it's politicized, and there's no way to avoid that in a free society. If people are able to join into political factions and they choose to support a candidate over another, there's no, without blocking freedom of speech, which has already been discussed, it seems as though there's no real way to ensure independence, an independent, I guess, independent voting on the highest court. So I guess that's just a challenge, and I think that it's a very slippery slope. So I don't know the answer, but
I think it's a challenge we'll be taking with us. It's a very good point, and I'll make sure to convey it to the team. How can we ensure that this politicization doesn't happen? Because again, it's the pendulum, right? Go one way or another, and there's, as you said, no perfect answer. I don't know if anybody else in the room would have an idea of how to ensure that this wouldn't happen.
I don't think you can ensure anything, because in Australia, for example, where I lived for 13 years, judges were not elected. It was a professional career. But what ended up happening is that if the political party that was in office did not agree with the decisions of the High Court of Australia, because the judges had a different interpretation of the law, because they are allowed to interpret the text in a number of hermeneutical ways, then the complaint was that the judges suddenly had become without having been elected. There's no way,
Right, yeah.
there's no way, it's inductive or deductive, both depends. There's no way. It's a process that, as you said, is a pendulum. Sometimes you're going to have the judiciary being too powerful. Some other times you're going to have the government being too powerful. So it depends on, on the circumstances, I think.
It has to need those checks and balances with everything we do, basically,
Exactly.
at all levels of government, absolutely. Compulsory voting, we haven't included, or perhaps you want to say something more about
One
this?
point on that. I know you've talked about certain checks on human rights and guarantees in the Constitution. Are there any specifically in the judiciary branch? Does the judiciary have any checks on other than the Constitution, checks on those kind of rights? 12-month waiting period, or the inability to create immediate rulings, I guess, in terms of immediately after traumatic events or big events to stop reactionary decision making. Are there any safeguards in place for that?
We've put those safeguards in more with direct participation than with the judiciary. Because the judiciary, we see them as professionals who have a certain number of years of experience, etc. So we would hope that this would happen in this direction. We were more worried about the other side of things. So no, we don't have those specific within the Constitution. It doesn't mean that this cannot be ruled by law, though. Right. This can be, because in the Constitution, at the end of the day, you have to limit what you put in, right?
Right.
But it is something to be kept in mind, and that could potentially come in by law. Compulsory voting, we haven't put it. Why? Because we prefer to engage people instead of punishing them. And how do we engage them? Through all of these mechanisms of participatory and direct democracy. We hope that these mechanisms will suffice in order to re-engage the citizens into the political process.
I just have one comment.
Maybe that's probably the last question. Is that? Yeah. One more question here. Is there anyone else, if not, or?
Just on the role of the judiciary and whether, I don't know, I guess best practice would be to elect or to appoint. I think one distinction between Australia and the US versus a lot of the European systems is sort of common law versus civil law. And judges in Spain currently and in many countries in Europe don't have the same level of power that judges in the US or Australia do, because they can't actually make law. So perhaps the risk isn't as high as it is here in North Carolina or wherever, where judges are elected, because judges are sort of bound to interpret law and they can't go ahead and set precedent and make law in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing I mentioned earlier, but I should have reiterated now, is that we have what we call la sala de control, which is a particular house that ensures that the judges do their work and limit themselves to whatever is said in the Constitution and abide by the laws. So we have that double house, those two houses with, we don't call them houses, we call them salas de control, salas. Anyhow, we have two bodies in the judiciary, one that makes the judiciary function and one that controls it. So this second body would be responsible to ensure that nothing crazy happens here, and if it's unconstitutional, then we would have an issue, right? And what we created a mechanism where both bodies would have to discuss and reach an agreement. If that agreement cannot be reached, the decision would have to be found through a referendum. So we're giving the second body a lot of strength to ensure that this doesn't happen. I should have mentioned that before.
Is there a model in the world for that, or is that? To me, it sounds like a Politburo. It's a Politburo, right? Yeah. So it puts my hair stands on end just to think about it as a lawyer.
Maybe it's the word control. It has kind of very negative connotations. Maybe accountability would be a better word for it.
Yeah, it's funny how important words are, because when we looked at the Constitution that we wanted to write, we made sure to stay away from the words that are usually used in the Spanish Constitution, which refer to a military system, the judiciary power. And then once you go into the judiciary power, they have a number of terms that are extremely, extremely military. We stayed away from this, and instead of calling them powers, we call them functions. judiciary function, legislative function, etc., right? So perhaps the word control falls a bit in here and slipped from the way we want to present things. But when you look at the details of the text, which will be published in not too long, which I hope you will, because it'll be in our webpage, and we'll be very happy to take your input from it, then you can tell us once you read the details of it if you think it acts that way, or if you think that it has sufficient measures to ensure that it is not neither perceived nor has the potential to be like that. So bear with me for a couple of weeks, and once the text is published, please send us those comments, because the last thing we want is a politburo, and I can guarantee you Catalans don't think like that in any way.
The gentleman had asked a question about, still in the air, concerning mandatory participation in elections. Did you answer that one?
The compulsory voting, right?
Yeah, did you answer that?
Yeah. I think it wasn't something that y'all were interested in, correct? It wasn't something you were interested in pursuing just because of the interest.
Yeah. Yes, we said. Yeah. I'll answer again. See if you think I answered or not. We do not contemplate compulsory voting because or people being fined, because we see that as a punishment, which goes against what this text stands for. And what we want to do is to incentivize people to be part of the political process through direct and participatory elections, etc., referendums, revocation. So we hope to engage citizens instead of punish them, and that this engagement will actually raise the votes in the elections.
The foundation of that concept requires an educated public. So if you're educated to the 6th grade, forget it. If you're educated to the 10th grade, close. What's the education policy within this Constitution?
This Constitution guarantees that everybody may be educated all the way.
But if they don't, can they participate in the elections?
It's secondary school. 16.
If they don't have an educated.
We didn't put the year in it, but it'd be around that age. But it's a good point. You need citizens to be educated in order to do that.
Or else you have
Right, but
mob.
yes, I think for an education system to work, it's not a question of making it a certain age mandatory. It's making it an efficient educational system. And the level of detail that we have in the articles here changed the whole paradigm of education that we have in Spain currently, where you study in Chinese walls, right? We don't really think this is the way that kids should be brought up. We suggestion, in order that they participate in democracy, that they study in a humanistic perspective, right? That they develop critical thinking, more like the Walden concept. The important thing is that they acquire knowledge not memoristically, which is something that is happening now, but by developing critical thinking, by developing discussions among them, and then you start the ball rolling. Of course, this is just an idea. This will take a very long time to implement. But it is what we would like to see in the long run, because after all, the Constitution in the US is over 200 years old, right? We hope that our changes that we're thinking now will be implemented over a very long period of time, and this is what we would like to arrive.
This is our second Constitution.
And, yeah.
First was Article of Confederation that didn't work.
Correct, yeah.
I think maybe also to put your mind at ease. I mean, one thing in Catalonia, and it doesn't happen that much in Spain, is the popular participation. I mean, getting people to do things is very easy. People are very socially minded, and I don't know, I mean, I think La Tirada could be a case in point where you can get in a country 7.5 million population, you can get 1.5 million in the streets, just to, to make a point. And the thing, it's even something as simple as it would be the popular dance. And even if you don't know how to dance, you just go say whatever there is one, and you just get in there and you are immediately accepted. What I mean is that is already in place, and I don't think making it compulsory, I don't think is even a thought.
I think you raise a very important point. When you look at the horrendous attacks in France that happened at that time, I think there was a march with 1.5 million people in Paris, roughly. I might be a couple 100,000 off, right? We're speaking of a country of over 60 million people here. Catalans have put in the streets since 2010 between 1.5 and 2 million people every year in order to participate in our political process. So this is reinforces what the gentleman says. I'm just giving a comparative example. There's a lot of interest in politics. Can it happen that people decide not to engage in politics? We think that this text sufficiently covers that through all these mechanisms that we mentioned, but particularly because we insist so much on the importance of education, which is the base of everything.
Excellent.
If there aren't any further questions, I'm going to be staying for a little while. Please, please, please send us your comments in our webpage. I've written them down as possible because they will be taken back to the Parliament. We want this text to be as comprehensive as possible, and particularly to our American friends, because you have a different mindset, a different way of seeing things. You haven't gone through the same system that we have gone for so long, so you can probably give us a depth and a width that we don't have. So thank you very, very much for being here today.
Make sure that you give us your address if we don't have it, because then we can keep in touch with you and send you any developments that we have about this, and you can be posted. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much.